Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 31st of May 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Double Fine launches Kickstarter for a second title by the name of Massive Chalice. The publishers of GTA Take-Two talk about used games. EA has made a number of online passes free in an effort to phase out the system completely, and Infinite Crisis has announced a partnership with Major League Gaming, adding the DC-themed Dota-style game to the circuit. All this and your OC Remix track of the day coming up right about now. After being one of the first developers to really popularize the Kickstarter method of developing games, Double Fine has announced a second game by the name of Massive Chalice, which will be done by the team behind Iron Brigade. Now, this is a second team within the company that is not currently involved in the development of Broken Age, which is, of course, previously known as Double Fine Adventure. The game is described as a classic tactical strategy in the vein of XCOM, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Fire Emblem, with a little bit of Game of Thrones thrown in there, and is a turn-based tactics and feudal fantasy game. The title also promises some limited roguelike elements, which claim that the content will be modular and randomized, with each playthrough beginning with a random selection of male and female heroes from various bloodlines, guaranteeing that each game will be unique. There are a number of other features, of course, that you can go check out in the description below this video. However, of course, the controversy surrounding this is the fact that this would appear to be a double dip by Double Fine, who have already dipped into the cookie jar once when it comes to Kickstarter, and as a direct result, some people are claiming that this is a little bit too much too soon. Some people are also, of course, doubting it on the basis that the first game isn't even finished yet, and putting resources into a second game right now doesn't make any sense. Now, here's the thing. People seem to have a very short memory. We already discussed this topic, and it was to do with the company by the name of In Exile. Now, of course, In Exile started something for Wasteland 2, and then later on created a Kickstarter for Torment Tides of Numenera, and there was a little controversy surrounding that, but it was very nicely explained away by the In Exile guys, saying that the way that the team actually works, the pre-production is done by a separate set of employees. It's done by a different team to the actual main production of the game, and pre-production is such a massive part of the overall game design process that these guys were basically sitting on their hands, so it would make sense to start a second game while the first one was currently in production. Now, in the case of Massive Chalice, it appears to be taken on by the team behind Iron Brigade, aka Trenched. So it's being led by Brad Moore, who is in fact, of course, not Tim Schafer, as most people could probably figure out. So it would appear that they do have the resources to do this. The doubts, of course, come in as a result of watching some of the documentaries that have been associated with the original Double Fine Adventure, that being Broken Age, because at this point, they are claiming that money is getting very, very tight indeed, and that they sorely underestimated the amount of money they would actually need to make this game. Surprisingly enough, the goal for Massive Chalice is actually less than $1 million, regardless of the fact that Double Fine Adventure has already burned through around $3.5 million in terms of its budget, according to the documentary series and interviews conducted by Two Player Productions. One has to wonder if they've actually learned anything. It's definitely a possibility. I think that they're in a better position now to handle the Kickstarter idea because they've already done it before. Now, of course, Broken Age will come out. I don't think there's really a question about that. So I don't really have a problem with them doing this. And when it comes down to Kickstarter, I've believed very much in the buyer is the one who dictates exactly what is deserving of being kickstarted. What you do with your money within the bounds of the law is really entirely up to you. If you wish to kickstart these titles, if you think they're worthwhile, then by all means do that. It's a little bit unfortunate, I suppose, that they're starting it now instead of after Broken Age finished, because if Broken Age finished and actually came out and they said, hey, look, this is what we did with Kickstarter, now let us do it again, then hell, I mean, they could get all of their games kickstarted. Some people have said, oh, they're just dipping into the pockets of the users. At the end of the day, if the users are willing to give them that money and the well hasn't dried up yet, then I really do not see why not. Now, you might say that it's ruining the chances of other companies, yeah, because there's only a finite amount of money that's really available to kickstart anything. But again, at the end of the day, they're doing it because they're interested in Double Fine games, and it is the buyer's market. The buyers want more Double Fine games, so they are giving that money. And by the time this comes out, the chances are this thing will already be funded. I'm looking at it right now at the time of recording, and it's over 10,000 backers already, with over halfway done, which is actually ridiculous, with 27 more days to go. June the 27th is the end of this particular thing. I'm just hoping that they have a really good idea of what they want to do and how they're going to achieve it, and they don't allow feature creep to really take over. It seems to be that's exactly what happened with Broken Age. They ramped things up for the money, and then they suddenly realized, oh, this is way more expensive than we thought it was. Good God, what the hell are we doing? And so on and so forth. So, we will see. Of course, if Broken Age never comes out or ends up being a massive disaster, then they're going to end up poisoning their own well there. So, for the meantime, I guess it's okay. I personally don't have a problem with it, and I'm much more interested in this than I ever was in Double Fine Adventure. You want to check it out? The link is in the description below this video if you wish to contribute to the Kickstarter. Take-Two Interactive has got on record discussing the matter of used games, and things are starting to get very interesting in this particular debate. Now, the CEO of Take-Two, going by the name of Strauss Zelnick, said that if Microsoft has figured out a way to tax used games, then we should be paid too. He goes on to say there's no question that if Microsoft has figured this out, we should get paid. It's hard to imagine why they should and we shouldn't. However, before you get out all of the pitchforks, he also went on to say that our view about used games has been, as opposed to whining or figuring out ways to punish the consumer for buying used games, we've figured out that we've better delight the consumer. He went on to give some very interesting information, saying, let's push up the quality, which you've seen in our Metacritic scores, and let's make sure that we give people DLC, often free, 3 or 4 weeks out, which is the time you're at risk of them trading the game in. He goes on to say, if you can keep the game in consumers' hands for 8 weeks, you almost don't care anymore about used game sales, because it's the first 8 weeks that really nail you. So his opinion overall seems to be, yeah, if there's gonna be used games, we'd like to get a slice of the pie, which I think, to be fair, is gonna be every publisher and developer, regardless of whether or not they decide to tell you for PR reasons, but also the fact that you can do things to minimize the actual effect of used games. And he actually has a really, really good point. You know, when I worked at Game, there were a few types of titles that got traded in an awful lot. And there were other types of titles that you just could not find anywhere. So the question is, what were they? Okay, so let's talk about it. The things that got traded in a lot were usually single-player focused titles, often with tacked-on multiplayer, and anything that was a yearly franchise. Now, that includes sports, and it also includes the previous version of stuff like Call of Duty games. Here's a story. So, we actually had to stop taking copies of Pro Evolution Soccer and FIFA at the store in Gallotree Gate in Leicester. That's where I worked for quite some time. The reason we had to stop taking them, and this is after, by the way, they drained the price down to £1 or less, yeah? So you were getting a quid or even 50 pence for these trade-ins, right? And people were still doing it anyway. They had to flat out stop taking them because there were just too many of them. I'd go upstairs to the place where everything was stored, and it was just piles upon piles of the previous version of that sports game. Single-player games as well were very, very prevalent in that respect because at that time, DLC wasn't really a thing. And as a direct result, once you beat a single-player game, you brought it back, you traded it in, and maybe you bought something else. Not an unreasonable thing to do, I've got to say. If you don't have a reason to continue to have a game on your shelf, then if trading in is a possibility for you, then you should do that. I think some people maybe got the wrong idea when I put out my thing about used games. I've never really been accusatory of anybody actually trading in or selling a game. If you have the ability to do that, then yeah, it's a sensible thing to do as a consumer. So you got all these sports games, you got all these single-player titles, you got all these old franchise titles, anything that they released on a yearly or indeed bi-yearly basis, you get a ton of trade-ins of the previous version. And what you'd then see is people would be clamoring for used copies of the latest version of whatever that franchise was, and they usually couldn't get it because a lot of people didn't trade it in because it was multiplayer focused. It's the multiplayer focused games that don't really get traded in all that much, and as a direct result, they do tend to maintain their trade-in value. Stuff like Call of Duty only really gets traded in very large numbers after the next version has actually come out. It's very, very rare to see a ton of trade-ins of that, because at the end of the day, you get it and you get on your little progression bike and that's what you do. And in fact, it actually gives some very interesting insight into the current system of multiplayer, whereby you have a very progressive way of doing things. And the reason is that it keeps you playing that game, keeps you buying DLC and map packs, and keeps that game on your shelf and not being traded in. This is something I actually feel has been put into place to adapt directly to that, especially on console. So that's something that you need to consider there. Take-Two are completely right in saying that if you offer enough compelling experiences and if you offer a reason to actually keep the bloody thing, then everything is just fine and dandy. And eventually, if they do trade it in, it doesn't really matter by that point. And they're actually kind of right there, because the longer you can keep it on the shelf, the better it is for going into the sort of second wave of the long tail of sales. You get to the point where you get that first big price drop on the title for the new game, so you get the surge of sales there. Maybe it goes platinum, so you get that range as well. It's very similar to the way that it's done on PC, only the PC one is a little bit more extreme because you have this larger variance of price points across massive digital distribution networks, right? So it's an interesting way of looking at it, and honestly, if there are ways to do that, if it was possible for every game to actually do that, then we wouldn't even need to be having this discussion. I guess the main problem is that that's not the case, and funnily enough, you might think, oh, well, it's just developers getting it wrong. But the weird thing about it is that a lot of people hate the idea of tacked-on multiplayer and progression-based multiplayer, and yet that comes in response to this very problem. If you want to keep a game on someone's shelf, then you've got to keep them playing it. If they don't have any interest in it anymore, they will bring it back. So you put them on a treadmill for a while, and generally speaking, they will keep that game on their shelf. It seems like almost everything that publishers and developers do to discourage new sales through design rather than either legislation or being heavy-handed with retailers actually ends up either backfiring or just being viewed in a very negative light. So it's a very difficult position for everybody to be in, I feel, and this is why it's a very complex discussion and doesn't have an easy answer. EA has removed the price of a large number of online passes on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. EA is in the process of phasing out the online pass system, claiming that new titles will no longer use it, and is also taking existing online passes and making them free on the service. Currently, the list of titles which qualify for this consists of Alice Madness Returns, Battlefield 3, Bad Company 2, Bulletstorm, Dead Space 2 and 3, Dragon Age 1 and 2, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, which I wasn't even aware actually had an online pass, Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3, Medal of Honor, as well as Need for Speed and Skate plus The Sims 3. Some interesting stuff there. A lot of it actually isn't a multiplayer pass, especially in the sense of Dragon Age Origins. It's actually their Project $10 program. So for Origins, that means you get the Stone Prisoner free, even if you didn't buy the game new in the first place. I suppose this is a recognition, of course, that at this point it doesn't really make that much of a difference whether the online pass system is in place or not, because these games are kind of past the point where EA really cares too much about them, but I'm kind of surprised to see it with Dead Space 3, considering that is the most recent of the titles. An EA rep had the following to say about the issue: as we discontinue online pass for our new EA titles, we're in the process of eliminating it for all our existing EA titles. We heard the feedback from the players and decided to do away with online pass altogether. Players will see it first with some EA Sports titles, where a prompt to enter an online pass code will no longer appear. With other titles, we're just making it available free of charge online. Interesting stuff. Again, I don't really see why, and I honestly don't even know why Online Pass had such a bad reaction. It seems very odd, I suppose, that people expect to be able to purchase a used game and have exactly the same benefits from buying new. I mean, why on earth would you even ever buy new if used was identical, which at the end of the day it is. It's digital. It either works or it doesn't. There's really no middle ground there. But at the end of the day, I suppose this is one of the first things that EA is doing to try to get back into the good books of gamers, and if it works, then good for them, I guess. At the end of the day, as a PC gamer, we've dealt with online pass, as it were, for ages, except we have a keyboard, so I guess it's a hell of a lot less annoying to enter it. And finally, Major League Gaming, the esports organization, has announced that it's working with Warner Brothers and Turbine to get involved with Infinite Crisis, the forthcoming Dota-like game from DC. Now, this particular title will actually be featured on the pro circuit and will have an exhibition match between Complexity and Curse Academy, which will be played live at E3 at the MLG area. This is going to be starting on June the 11th at 12 p.m. PST, and it's going to be streamed on Major League Gaming if you actually want to check this out. Now, this is a Dota-style game that features characters from all over the DC universe, and quite literally as well. We're talking about all sorts of different alternate reality versions, including stuff like Gaslight Batman, and so on and so forth. I'm intrigued to see where it goes. Admittedly, it does look like yet another Dota-style game, and I'm not really sure what exactly it has going for it, aside from the IP that it's linked to. I'm curious to get my hands on it because, as you're well aware, I like Dota-style games, and the notion of having all sorts of alternate reality versions of DC superheroes fighting it out is a pretty cool idea indeed. The fact that it's being brought onto the pro circuit is a little strange. It's not unprecedented, of course. They do this every now and again. They actually do bring these sponsored games on and they give them a stage. I believe it was done with PlayStation All-Stars at one point, although they were also partnered with Sony in a big way at that point. And they're also going to be doing it with PlanetSide 2 eventually. So I guess it's not completely out of the ordinary, but it does mean that there's a second Dota-style game on the circuit alongside League of Legends, and the CEO Sundance today confirmed that Dota 2 will actually be joining the circuit at some point. Now, this is a little bit interesting because there were rumors circulating that Riot was trying to impose a non-compete on various other organizations. However, it would appear that this is not the case if Dota and Infinite Crisis are able to join the circuit, unless, of course, League of Legends is leaving it, which would be very, very silly indeed, and I very much doubt that MLG would want to do that, considering that it is very much one of their highest-grossing games. I believe it was beaten marginally by the first HOTS tournament for StarCraft 2 in Dallas, although not by much and certainly not all the time, and League of Legends is of course recognized as by far the bigger game right now. As to whether or not Infinite Crisis can actually end up being an esports title, well, that remains to be seen. Licensed Dota-style games like Guardians of Middle-earth certainly did not manage to do that in any way, shape, or form, but this being a PC-driven title perhaps has more chance of being able to pull that off. I'm, of course, looking forward to trying it, and hopefully I'll be able to show you it on the channel sooner rather than later. Alright folks, that about wraps me up for today and of course for the week. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Please do have a safe and wonderful weekend. Before I go, I'd like to leave you with the OC Remix track of the day. One of my favorite games from the Genesis era, or Mega Drive as we like to call it, which it was in the UK. Far better name than Genesis, honestly, so I can definitely see why you guys were jelly. But Golden Axe 2 was a fantastic title alongside, of course, the Streets of Rage series, and it had some great music. While Streets of Rage gets a lot of attention as a result of its amazing soundtrack, Golden Axe is often overlooked. However, there's a great remix here by Digidis, and it's called Battle Axe Wielding Dwarf. It's a remix of the song Ravaged Village, originally composed by Nafumi Hataya, and it is pretty damn cool, so hopefully you enjoy it. I'm done. Thank you very much for watching. As I said, have a great weekend, please, and I will see you next time.